I swear we can't get one damn Monday where I get the place to myself, and it's really annoying. Like, you would think in a world where people have school and work, they would go Monday through Friday, but they don't. I don't know why. Well, I have a pretty good idea, but uh, I don't want to get too much into the details. I guess you could say part of it is I think a lot of these schools give too many days off. Like back when I was in, you know, preschool, middle school, for example, like during a lot of the holidays that weren't Christmas, you would get the holiday off, and that was it. Like if you had Halloween, for example, on Wednesday, you would maybe get Wednesday off, maybe not. Uh, but if it was like Thanksgiving, for example, you would get the day of Thanksgiving off, and maybe one other day, like if it was in between that and the school day. But some of these schools, like they'll have kids off for an entire week. That's why I said I don't even take education seriously. As far as I believe in studying and trying to learn things and whatnot. But when you have kids that just they get to dodge going to school like at least a day every week, or in some cases multiple days every week, it turns into kind of cartoonish. Like because I just don't see how that helps prepare somebody for the real world. Um, it's like when I go to my job, for example, like I've never missed a single day. I've only been late one time, and that's because how far away it is and underestimating traffic the first time I drove over to there as an employee. But besides that, I've been pretty consistent about showing up and being around when they call me in or whatever. And speaking of the job, yesterday we closed early because of it's Super Bowl, and it was really funny watching people drive up and call in convinced that we were open somehow. Like it was amusing because it's like you go on Google and they have a thing that says place closes at this time, and then when you physically go up to the place, you see where it says closed at et cetera, and they just kept coming. Like they drove in the parking lot, they knocked on the glass, they called in. Um, One of the managers actually had a phone by his pocket because he was just so amused by how they kept like trying to get through. It was I thought it was kind of funny, but also it just shows that people I don't know, I guess I kind of get where if someone gets used to going to a place or to a thing over and over again, they do start to just be convinced like, "Oh yeah, of course it's open." But it also is kind of crazy that they don't think, "Hey, maybe if this is a major holiday, it's probably not going to have the same business hours." Like for example, I knew before Christmas I had to go and get my stuff from the market because the market will be closed on Christmas. A lot of places are closed because a lot of people just want to go home and have a good time with their family, quote unquote. So uh because of just assuming that, I still went and did my thing, grab stuff a day earlier isn't going to hurt anybody, nothing's going to expire in 24 hours, but I just made sure that if they were closed, which they ended up being closed the next day, I would still have my things or have been prepared for it. But they don't do that. They go and sit at the house and try to get their food, I guess, after the game starts. And then they find out they get the rude awakening of like, oh, yeah, it turns out I can't actually get anything from here. Oh, well. I've always been fascinated by the idea that a place can close at like 10 o'clock and then the people that work there don't leave until like sometimes 2 or 3 in the morning. Like, I'm so fascinated by how even in having several people, like half a dozen people, 6, 7, 8, to clean the place up, it still takes them at a minimum like 3 plus hours just to do that. And that's one of the reasons why I don't like my usual time that they have me come in, because I've never worked any other job in the past where they say you're going to leave at 1 o'clock and then you don't leave very often for another hour or hour and a half. Like I've never seen it anywhere else I've worked. They tell you you're coming from 1 to 9, you show up at 1, you leave at 9. They tell you you're coming from 12 to 8, you show up at 12, you leave at 8. And they're like that during their regular business hours, because once the clock hits the time where it says, hey, you can leave. I've seen employees jump up and go, "Hey, it's this time. Can you guys clock me out? Can you guys, give me a swipe?" So they know that it's not normal to just keep people past this time that they say you're supposed to go, but they don't care. But I swear the worst shift was the one where it was me, a manager, and this other guy who were just like in the store, just the three of us for like a whole 50 minutes. Like everyone else got to leave. And it was driving me nuts because normally, and like even after the last 2 months, I still haven't seen that where it's just a manager and two other people in there for some protracted amount of time. So it was even crazier. I was like, why won't you just let me go? What is wrong with you? She was driving me nuts. Talking about, oh, it's the staff. It's like, yeah, but the staff didn't let you dismiss everybody else until it was just me and one other person here. Man, that was bad. Uh, and if you bring it up to the other guy, because that manager left, but the other person that happened to is still there. He talks about it like he's a veteran. He's like, I really hope we never have to do that again. No, there's no excuse for it being that few people and still having to like stay there even longer. Mm. Yeah, I've really rarely been as dissatisfied with employment as I am now, because it just seems like a lot of jobs, if they hire you, it's part-time, and then even that, it's like they still can find a way to screw with you. Like you would think, okay, at a minimum, I'm gonna have like 30 hours a week. I see 20 something this week. So I'm just rolling my eyes. And then the only day where you can pick up an extra shift is on Saturday, because of course nobody wants to work on the weekend. So they're ready for you. It drives me crazy because of just how unreliable it is. Like you can have almost 40 hours in one week from just all the overtime, not overtime, but all the like the nights where they say you're coming for 7 hours and you stay for like 9, and then all of a sudden they cut out one extra day, and I guess good luck getting those hours back, or supplementing them. Yeah, I had this other job that I applied for. It's some kind of driver position, and they sent me an email, not email, a text message, and they're like, "Oh, on Thursday at 9 a.m." The lady over the phone tells me the job is on Saturday from like 2 in the afternoon to 11 p.m., and I'm fine with that because that means I can still stream whatever, like in the earlier part of the day. Um, I get a message from them. They're like, "Oh, you can come on Thursday at 9 a.m. to begin your training. That's 4 to 6 hours." Like, well, that's cool, but I get off from the other job at 1 o'clock. But they typically keep us until 2, or sometimes 2:30, which means that I'm gonna get off at 2 or 2:30, come back home at either 2:30 or 3 o'clock, and then like have to go to sleep for maybe like 4 hours, 5 hours before having to go and drive over to this other. I said it's just too much, and they haven't responded since I sent that message. So I guess they're done with me. That would be really interesting if they just are like, okay, never mind then. The only day they have available is the one where I have to get up at 9 in the morning after going to sleep at 3 in the morning or getting off from another job at 3 in the morning. It's really interesting. To me, that just doesn't make any sense. Like they can't they have no other days of it, no days available besides that one. There's just this one day for training, and if you don't take it, then we don't want anything to do with you. You see how quickly they turn on you, right? It's like, oh yeah, we want you as an employee. Oh, you can't work. You can't do the training at this hour of the morning because you're coming back from another job that late in the night, and you don't want to have to like wake up a few hours later just to go to something else that might not even be a thing you actually want to do. Oh oh well, too bad. Thanks for doing that stuff for us. We appreciate it. All this information. I swear, it's like sometimes I think these employers. I know and like I know a lot of times they have multiple managers, but if you saw how excited or how like quickly one of them was trying to move me along, right? Set up an account for me on the site and then all the rest of that. And then it's like a week later, you can't even get them to respond to a text message. So I said, just weird. Like, what's the point of that? That's why I said like there's a lot of instances in the modern era where you think something is going to go right or be paid off, and it just doesn't. It just like stays the same, and more stagnant crap. Hmm. No, they love wasting people's time with stuff like this. Just employers really get off on the whole angle of like, how do I make this person think that they're so irresistible and we need them, and then when you actually start working for them, they're screaming at you and blaming you for everything that happens. Um, I mean, I even saw an example of that yesterday where there was like a guy that told me to get a box and like open it up, put the stuff inside, and then leave the box as it was. And then I left it there, and then he was like, Where'd you put the box? Where'd you put the box? You did fold this." Like, no, I left it there, and then somebody else. I didn't even bother arguing with him, but it was so stupid. Like I literally just left the box the way it was, and then somebody else apparently took it and folded it up. Which I mean, hey, doesn't bother me, but if he doesn't believe that I followed the orders or directions, he can go and look on that stupid camera they have. Yeah, getting out of there at 7 o'clock was is not something I'm used to, but I welcome nonetheless. I even parked in a different place that I normally wouldn't, because what it is that they have a little one of those little like tow warning signs where it's like, oh, you can't be parked here from 3 a.m. to 5 a.m. And again, any other job, whatever, right? Because you would think, oh, you get off at 1 a.m., so it's not like you have to worry about it. But remember, 2 o'clock, 2:30 at the latest. Sometimes we can't even physically leave the place until 3 o'clock. So that makes me not want to park over there, because you do run the risk of being in that spot until 3 in the morning, even though you get off at supposedly 1 o'clock, because of how long they keep you past the time you're supposed to leave. I still wouldn't risk it, which is really crazy to think about, because it's like this job actively gets to tell you a lie. Like every time I see we're getting off at 1 o'clock, it's never 1 o'clock. A lot of times it's not even like 1:30. It's almost always an extra hour. And it drives me nuts. Like and because I said before that they at first they made it seem like, oh, we were here because of the person that washes stuff. It's like, yeah, but there's a person washing stuff all day long who, if left to their own devices, or vices rather, uh yeah, the devices was correct. we'll finish this stuff within, you know, the hour of 1 o'clock, maybe a little bit after, maybe a little bit earlier, whatever, depending on how much stuff is there. And you know that, so you find all this other crap to have them do, and it's just like, again, the scapegoat stuff, like, "Oh, man, this we took so long because that the person washing the dishes was taking forever." It's like, but now you have someone that does it, and you say does it fast, and then you still take forever. Man, they love getting that extra hour. Personally, I'd rather just go home at the, time that I'm designated for. Like, I know somebody will say I'm crazy for passing up work, but if somebody actually wants to give you real work, they're going to give you an extra day, not an extra hour, especially not when it goes past the time you were supposed to even be there in the first place. It's all just so stupid. Where is this damn thing? There's a lot of little remarks on here. I guess we can start with the story stuff. So what I've noticed is that a lot of times I'll have an idea for a story, like just a premise, right? Like, oh, there's this story about this character that can uh you know sorry, I just got some it looks like this driver application I had apparently got processed or went through or something. It blindsided me. I'm used to reading rejection emails. So when I see they're like, we would like to process, like, huh? What do you mean? So going back to what I was saying, I've noticed there's a tendency where if I write something, I can have a good premise or a premise that I think is good. But then when I try to actually, go piece by piece, uh, it's much more difficult to convey. Like sometimes I'll like, for example, if I wanted to write a TV show, I'd have my premise of what the show is about, and then I would have like episode plot summaries that give you like a basic idea of like, okay, in this episode this happens, and there's like this overarching story with this plot thread or this villain or whatever. Um, but I'm telling you, like I've noticed that the more and more I try to do that stuff, it just seems as if it's not I don't want to say tenable, but it's not easy to just cram all of it into one, semblance of like I'll either think I have too little time to tell what I'm trying to tell, or then I'll be like, okay, I guess I have to extend this, but then I'll also think, okay, maybe this is not entirely needed. Maybe this doesn't service the story. It's just a maze of like ideas bouncing around, competing with each other for, which is right and which is wrong. And I just can't seem to figure out which side is in the right, which is unfortunate because I do like a lot of the ideas I have. It's just when you're trying to, because sometimes I'll just take a script and start writing stuff, and it'll I don't want to say it pays off, but it can oftentimes feel more relaxing than just, did I put this in there? Did I forget to put that in there? But it's like you kind of want to strike that balance of doing something by itself without any kind of notes or outline, but then also making sure that you're able to go over this stuff and just kind of not have it be like a mess, like just random things happening. Serialization is one of the hardest things about trying to make a show because you're always thinking like, hey, I have to make this fit with this other event. I have to make this, have to do with this other thing. I can't just not go around with any details like what's going on. And I have noticed that a lot of times in stories I don't really like all that much. There is a tendency to just have too much of something or too little of something. Um, I bring this show up a lot because it's a good example. Like I bring this show up because, and I say this with complete conviction. I've never had a single TV series where I really, really like the first season, and then after that, it just goes to complete disinterest. But Young Justice, I mean, that was a show where in that first season they had six main characters. Each one of them had development. Each one of them had episodes that fleshed them out, and there was an overarching story with some intimidating villains. In fact, one of the main criticisms of the first season was that it felt like the heroes could never just win against the villains like outright. Like everything was according, to their plan or part of their plan. But you get the idea that even with its flaws, it still succeeded in terms of at least developing its leads and having some overarching tale. By the time you get to that stupid second season, you have this big time skip where most of the members from the first season aren't even there anymore. They're mostly reduced to like supporting and cameo roles. And you have all of these new characters who have nowhere near as much development because there's just too many of them. The cast is too large. That's why when that show got canceled back in 2012, I didn't bat an eye because by the time they were ready to yank it, I had already stopped being invested. And then when it came around with season 3, I tried to, say, okay, maybe I was too harsh. They did the exact same thing, added more characters, more stuff that was just not necessary in my opinion. And then guess what? They get to season 4, they start to slow down a little bit. I think they kind of recognize like, hey, we really have gotten ahead of ourselves. We did one good season and then we just started cramming all this stuff in here. But by that point, it's like, am I gonna skip over when I do rewatches the second and third season to watch something that seems more like a sequel to season 1 than season 2 did? So, yeah, when that show got canceled the second time, I felt a little bit worse because I did think season 4 was better than, 2 or 3, but again, it's like a lot of the goodwill for that show died back in 2012, and then a lot of it that I tried to restore was, like, betrayed when it was resurrected several years later. I find that so comedic that you just have this series that just keeps on like chucking and trucking and trucking because there's a lot of people that really like that show. Um, and I wasn't necessarily dismayed by that, but I just kept like making the point of, too many damn characters. And I saw the comparisons they tried to make. Oh, well, in this other cartoon, they have a lot of characters. Like, but it's not even just about having a lot of characters. In a lot of mangas and animes, they have a lot of characters, but there's still a central focus on, one, two, three. Just to give an example, like Naruto has a lot of characters, but the focus is on Naruto. Sometimes you get some other character that gets attention here or there, but it's mostly about him. So even if there's a lot of characters, you don't feel like you're just watching events unfold from no singular or specific focus. It doesn't look like it's all over the place in terms of, not having a singular protagonist or group of protagonists you can like lean into and get invested in. With Young Justice, after that first season, man, it just tanks, and they people just love pretending that they don't know what I'm talking about. What do you mean it has too many characters? I mean that it has too many protagonists. It doesn't have a singular focus or a set core focus like it did during the first season. Think I'm kidding. I would rather watch something that has a core focus over pretty much anything that doesn't any day of the week. And like I'm not even talking about shows where it's like anthologies, right? Where it's like the characters change every episode. I'm talking about a show that tries to have that serialized narrative, but then there's no singular set of characters to get invested in or attached to. Like I would rather watch well, I'm not gonna say Clone Wars because I do like Clone Wars, but Clone Wars is a good example. It's like that's another serialized show, and it has, I'd say, a pretty balanced focus on Anakin, Obi-Wan, Ahsoka, Yoda to some extent. I mean, it does what I'm talking about. You have events unfolding. There's a larger story, but you never feel like who is this show about again? Who's the protagonist? What is this? Hmm. So that's one of the biggest, most important things to me about um, series. They need to have some core focus, and that's why I bring up Young Justice so much because whether it be live action, whether it be cartoons, I really can't think of another show where the core cast changes so rapidly, so fast that you don't even like you almost can't even make sense of it. You're like, wow, that was just 1 year ago. We had these eight, and now it's this 10, and only three of them are from the first season. I'd love to know what they were thinking when they thought to do that second season. I'd love to have been in their minds because it doesn't make any sense to me that you would go from what you had in year one to year two that fast. Because even though I've always been someone who's been critical of the X-Men movies, which I maintain that in general I don't like them. I think that the first and second one are good. The third one is horrible, and then the other ones are pretty hit or miss. But even with those, I can still say, you know what? The one thing they have over Young Justice is that they pretty much have a core group that they don't break away from, which does irritate me a bit because X-Men in the comics is so different from that. They have all these different books and titles, and everybody gets their time to shine because there's so many different comics. Uh Wolverine, Professor X, Magneto, and to a lesser extent Jean Grey are pretty developed as far as I felt like I knew the character by the end of at least that original trilogy they had. That's actually another problem. The idea of just having X-Men be a trilogy is hilarious to me because there's just so many generations of X-Men. Like you could have a trilogy with the original team and then branch off to Astonishing. And I don't know why they thought it was a good idea to try and like cram all this different stuff into three movies. And I'll never forgive them for trying to do the Dark Phoenix saga and screwing it up twice. It'll never make sense to me why they were able to get that saga to work in the cartoon, but then with all this big budget film crap, they can't hack it. I mean, we know the real reason they change stuff up too much. They go and they alter things and mess with it and move stuff around, and this person is not related to that person, that kind of crap. Which it's like it's bad enough that when you're a fan of comics, you have to kind of just sift through ignorance. Like you have to just accept the stuff is not known to the general public unless it's been adapted in something. Um, but it's like they'll take a whole 8 issue, 9 issue story and try to cram it into this 2 hour. Like at least if they do something like Endgame where it's 3 hours, it's like recognized this big event, like we can't make this shorter. This is the end. But they don't even try that. They're like, okay, we'll adapt this. Because honestly, if you were being creative in live action, you could do Dark Phoenix probably like on top of something else, which is what the X-Men trilogy seemed to kind of like be hinting at toward the start of it. Not the start, but like in the second film where you see the Phoenix in the water. I just think that they would have been way better off if they had bit the bullet and made, X3 and X4 Dark Phoenix and just adapted it more faithfully, obviously with their own like live action aspects added in, I guess you could say. Um, than just, oh, let's try to cram all of it into one movie. And that's why I said Hollywood's obsession with trilogies really does kill a good story. Um, like they are obsessed with the number three, and it has done a complete number on a lot of different stories that are out there. And that's why I said that I just, in striving for originality, I really don't like trilogies at all. And when I say that, it doesn't mean I dislike, like, I like Back to the Future, I like Star Wars, whatever. Just I'm really sick and tired of everything having to be three. Like, I hate that number so much now. The beginning, middle, and end. Obviously, when you make a movie, you have an act one, an act two, and act three. When you make a TV show, an episode of it, you have act one, act two, act three. Um, which is actually something I thought was interesting, that a lot of people will talk about how TV shows sometimes, when they have a season, it feels like a movie because it's all like building to something. But when people try to like actually watch it as a movie, it doesn't work because each episode has a start, a middle, and an end. So you can't just like watch these episodes, pretend that they're a film when like they're all actually itty bitty movies when you really, break them down to it. That was just a point I always found so interesting, because I remember when I believe it was when Transformers Prime came out, they did like the first 5 episodes, and they took this like big hiatus, and they tried to say, oh, like, this is a movie, this is the movie premiere, 2.5 hour event. But really it didn't feel like a movie, because every episode has a beginning, a middle, an end. I find that so interesting, just in terms of like, in like, from a business standpoint, it makes sense that they would market the episodes as a film, to say like, hey, you can't miss any of this. This all ties together, and every minute is so crucial. But the reality of it is, they wrote a big season, like a big, basically, set of episodes that admittedly do connect, but they don't actually have. You don't have to watch them as a group. Like, they could air one of those, like, this episode titled Part Four, and it would still function as its own thing, as far as when you watch it by itself, beginning, middle, and end. No, I never would market anything like that as being a movie, because it's not just like, if you wanted to say, oh, we're going to put the first three X-Men films and say they're just one big movie. It's like, that doesn't work, because each one has a beginning, middle, and end. Even if you wanted to do something like Infinity War and Endgame, which are much more connected than a lot of these other superhero films, it still really wouldn't work, because they both have the beginning, the middle, and granted, one picks up immediately after the other, but, you know, it's just one of those things where they don't pay much attention to it. I didn't even get to say that, like, another thing that's really lost is a good villain. Like, I'm kind of surprised by how many series are kind of like I like or enjoy, and the villain isn't even that good, or is just whatever. Um, Like, a lot of people, the MCU was considered successful financially anyway, and I would say with critics between 2008 to, when Endgame came out, so like 11 years. But one of the things everybody knew was that the villains weren't that good, to where there's been like whole videos done about it. I even did a stream about it as well. And I said, "Isn't that interesting that you're adapting the Marvel universe? Marvel has some of the best villains in all of fiction, in my opinion. And you somehow you screw up, right? You don't make villains that are really memorable, compelling, other than maybe Loki and Thanos. But yet somehow you're still able to convince people these are good stories. And again, some stories can be good without having a good villain. I mean, like Civil War, for example, as a film functions as well as it does and is liked by as many people as it does because you're seeing the good guys at each other's throats, um, really in a way that had never been done in a superhero film before. Even if I do think comic Civil War is more interesting because there's just so much more stuff going on and various characters that take opposing sides. Um, but yeah, they just it's interesting how you can really trick people, or not trick people, but just that you can get away with having a bad or lame or awful villain and still have people like your thing. Um, I mean, even those who have watched the Marvels are not like gushing about, was it Zar Benz or whatever her name was. And it is interesting to think at this late stage, we still have the crappy generic doomsday bad guy that just keeps appearing in all this stuff. Like, I went and looked up old forum posts where they were talking trash about Defoe's Goblin in the original 2002 Spider-Man film. And I said, how crazy is it that with a villain like that, he has an origin, a motive. Um, there is some complexity to him because it appears that he does truly care about his son as far as you know wanting to get revenge for him. Uh, he has memorable lines. He challenges the hero. I mean, by any objective metric, I would say he works. And it's a metric that a lot of people seem to agree with. That's why he got brought back in No Way Home. But it's like I just find it interesting that a villain who, again, we see the origin of. So he's a developed character because we see him at work. We see his, whatever is bothering him and whatnot. His relationship with his son. There's some complexity as far as you know wanting to get the person that is opposing him to join his side, but then also wanting to torture him. He's intimidating as far as in the context of the story, right? Like I know that a lot of people go, "Oh, stupid Power Ranger costume," but he actually is very effective in terms of being a threat to Spider-Man. So it's like, how does a villain that's that good back when it came out get like ridiculed? I just 20 years, man. It's people their standards have changed. I think what it is that after the Raimi trilogy ended and the MCU started and was the other one, the DCEU began, people, more and more people kind of noticed that, like, yeah, these villains are getting more and more generic and there's not really anything interesting or memorable about them. Like, so they went back to some of the older stuff and they're like, wow, this one was actually pretty good. Because I know that it used to be that Ock was the most well liked antagonist from that trilogy, uh, because he looked comic accurate. He had an origin that wasn't the same as the comic, but it was one that was sympathetic and just Melina's performance in general was really well liked. So it's been fascinating to kind of watch it get flipped on its head, where now they're both considered really good, but like Goblin appears to have overtaken the other one, which I'm not upset by, but I already said before, a lot of non-comic readers like to talk trash about Ock. It's really sad because I went over the various things that make him one of Spider-Man's arch enemies and how very little of that has been adapted anywhere. Like, to this day, I don't know why when they did No Way Home, they couldn't have just done the Sinister Six. You have 5 villains already, and you couldn't have. No sense, man. Not one shred of sense. But no, a good villain, can be just someone that challenges the hero, um, or someone who actually stands as a character and is developed and, has a motivation that you can kind of, like, understand. Like, that's why I brought up Zod from Man of Steel, where it's like, you have this alien who wants whose purpose, who was created to preserve his, people's, uh, way of life, right, with trying to make a new Krypton, and he comes into conflict with someone who is Kryptonian, so of the same species as him, but has none of the same values or beliefs because he was raised independently of being with his people. So he feels more attached to the group that Zod is seeking to eradicate with his plan. But it's just interesting that they had an antagonist who, again, it's like genocidal maniac, whatever. But there is some understanding that he is doing this more so for the sake of his own people than ha 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 ha, Earthlings will be destroyed, which I did find interesting, and that is one of the reasons why I think he's one of the better, at least comic book movie villain antagonist of the last probably 11 years, like of the 2010s at least. Probably the best DCEU villain. I haven't seen every DCEU film, so I'm not going to completely stake that, but he was very memorable. So much so that when they brought him back for Flash, I was really excited, and then I saw the actual movie, and I was like, "Well," and I'll just say this: like one of the things I liked about No Way Home with Ock and Goblin is that we at least got a new fight with them, and the Spider-Man of that film, and then also they both have some significant role to play in the story. Zod's role in the Flash is so bad that Michael Shannon, his actor, came out and was like, "Yeah, we're just I just feel like I'm playing as an action figure," because that's what he was. And it's so sad too, because it's like the seeds of what Zack Snyder planted, like, even if you don't like him as a director, whatever, that's not what this is about. The seeds were there from Man of Steel where they could have had a story where Zod meets, Barry. Barry wants to save his mother. Zod thinks he can like strike some agreement with him, like, hey, if I help you save your mother, you'll help me make a new planet for myself, or maybe you can like get me, run back in time and prevent what happened to Krypton from happening. I mean, there was so much they could have done there with a character who wants to save his mother and a character who has lost his people and their world respectively. And they completely squander it. That's why I said that movie, I've only seen it one time. I don't want to watch it ever again. Like I didn't even care about the baby in the microwave, that stupid way of saving somebody. It's bad. It is. I always have my alarm set to wake me up, and then I wake up way before the time it tells me to go in. But I'm just saying that like that was an example of where you could have taken a really, really good villain and done something more interesting with them, like down the line. And that's why I said The Flash is such a frustrating movie because it's like you brought Zod back to life, which means we can do more stuff with him, but then the universe is also ending after this movie, so what's the point? It's just so bizarre, man. No, these universes are just getting obnoxious. And like I said, they're really good at making, some superheroes that people like the look of or uh, look cool or do something cool. But as far as making a complex, decent, good antagonist, a lot of stories lack it. I mean, give you another example. Look at Kylo Ren from the sequel trilogy. It's like here's this guy who you want us to believe is like the successor to Darth Vader, right? He's gonna be like his grandpa, and you have him take out his dad, right? Like get strike him down. Oh, he's more evil than Vader because Vader could never kill his own family. But then what do you do in the next movie? You pivot. Oh well, there's good in him. There's good in him. And then in the third one, because you have him take out his master in the second one, which makes you think, oh damn, he's going to be the main bad guy for the third one. Then the third one, you shoehorn in the original trilogy's main antagonist, or I guess you could say the overarching antagonist of the whole saga gets revived out of nowhere, out of the complete blue sky. Like I said, I don't know how anybody watches the sequel trilogy and doesn't think that it's insane to just have this character who died, like who was infamously thrown off of a ledge in the third original film and like came back in in terms of like being younger in the prequels, right? Now somehow can return, but this time actually after like from being deceased somehow Palpatine returned. That describes that whole movie's plot in a nutshell. It's bad. But both Vader and Palpatine are good examples of good antagonists. You have the one who's like the brute, right? Goes out and directly orders stuff, whatnot, and then the other one who's just kind of like overseeing things, laying the seeds. Mm. And then of course, besides having a good story, like I guess just like a good overarching theme structure, good villain, you also probably I'd say need some good characters, and that's a whole other bag of worms to unpack. Because the thing with the villain is like they're supposed to be someone that just opposes the hero. They don't even have to be evil. They can just be the antagonist. Um, that's why villains are so varied as they are, where sometimes they're just outright menaces, other times they have redeeming qualities. But if you're talking about heroes or the good guys or the protagonists, they have a much more, and I'd argue, rigid role they have to satisfy. Like they have to be someone that the audience can support and believe in and also back and be on the side of. Ugh. And that's where it becomes harder to write them because sometimes writers will think, "Oh, if I make the hero have flaws, it'll make them more relatable." But then they also have to like walk the tightrope of not making it be anything too bad. Like I know a lot of Superman critics who've never even read a single Superman comic will say he's so perfect. He never makes any mistakes. Like, not really. So I said like they get an idea of a character in their head and then they just kind of use that to inform the basis of their beliefs about them. God, I'm trying to think what would be a good example of because I do believe in giving examples. Um hmm. Trying to think of something that's not superhero related. I guess we could use Luke because that it's the hero's journey of this inexperienced protagonist that does something further beyond themselves, and you see their struggle to get their powers. So it doesn't feel like he just gained it out of nowhere. Because that's another problem with the modern protagonist that their powers seem to just kind of be given to them. We actually were making fun of I believe it was that Miss Marvel show because her powers are literally sent to her in the mail. It's like the lamest origin you've ever heard. God, speaking of a good example of a bad protagonist, we could talk about Captain Marvel, how it's like, oh yeah, here's this character who has no flaws, like literally no flaws, and she's very powerful. None of the villains can do anything to her, at least permanently. I'm not kidding. That character is, I feel like in every series there's like a jump the shark moment. There's something that is introduced or whatever that kind of like ruins the story or hurts it significantly. The introduction of Captain Marvel into the MCU was like the beginning of everything that is currently wrong with it. Like having this character who's overpowered, their personality is like a plank of wood. You really couldn't tell me anything they like whatsoever. Um, they're not really intimidated or gone after in any significant way by their villains. Their antagonists are just kind of like punching bags. They don't really strike any fear or even purport themselves to be intimidating. It's all just a big joke. Like there's nothing there. It's so hollow. Like she is completely bland. And I always was wondering how are they going to do Captain Marvel 2 because it's like you look at another trilogy, just to give you an example, something like the one that people like the most, Captain America, right? From the MCU, that is. And it's like the first movie, origin story, second movie, all this stuff with Hydra, much and Winter Soldier, which all like ties back to the first movie. It feels like an overarching story. I couldn't see for the life of me how you could develop Captain Marvel because it was like she has no personality. Um, and you just have this character that's like a complete vapid waste of everyone's time and puts and just oh god. I couldn't sit through the Marvels. I wouldn't bother with it, and I've said that before, but there's a reason why out of any of the characters who had a movie where their name was like where they were the title character, she's the only one that wasn't struck down by a lawsuit that prevented them from using the character again, like Hulk, who now has to share a movie's I guess starring role with two other people. Mm. I don't know who thought that was a good idea. I just think when you have a bad character, you're gonna get a flop. Because we could talk before about how like a lot of movies are now like flopping. Like a lot of these big Hollywood blockbuster films are just not going anywhere. But really, I think some of that is due to bad stories that nobody cares about, stuff that nobody wants, and just the excess of spending, man. Like, if you gave me a budget of 5 million, which is I'm not saying it's a tiny bit of money, but comparatively speaking to these several hundred million films it is, as someone who is mindful of their means, even in their personal life, I would very willingly find a way to not overspend or spend past whatever the amount we have allotted to us is. I would write something where we can get like a couple of rooms, maybe we use the forest, and we create a story that way. We don't need to have these giant, big, huge car chases and streets closed off. It's just not necessary. Not everything has to be some 100 million, $200 million investment. It doesn't. It's not a thing that needs to occur. And you're really seeing the fallout of that with the way that this a lot of these like newer Hollywood films are performing, where it's just they can make $250,000 and still be a flop, be a complete bomb. Like a lot of people are saying, "Oh, Aquaman 2 flop because of Amber Heard's." Like, I mean, there's some people I'm sure who didn't see it because of her, but you're not going to go from $1 billion, what, 6 years ago to 200 million. without there being several factors. And one of the factors is people are getting sick and tired of these stupid superhero movies. I'm telling you. Like in a world where Barbie makes more than some of these films combined, that's all you need to know. I'll tell you, if it was like if Barbie had come out back in like 2009, 2010, 2013, like right as Marvel and DC were like really gearing up with their cinematic universes, there's no way that thing would have performed anywhere near as well, comparatively speaking to them. But people want something different. Okay, they just sent me a message saying that they don't work on the only day available is Thursday at 9 in the morning. It's like, well, I can't do it. I'd say that's the worst part about working late. Like they just expect people to have nothing to do and go to their other crap. Mm. And these people are liars. Like one will say, "Oh yeah, we work on Saturday." It's like, okay, so why is this person now telling me that you don't work on Saturday? No consistency whatsoever. That's one of the reasons why I don't like talking to employers outside of when I'm at the job or actually hired, because they one manager says this, another one says that. You don't know who to believe anymore. It's one of the worst recurring themes I've noticed about these places, just the inconsistency. No, I would probably say that the key ingredients for a good character is some again, if we're talking about a good character who's like a protagonist, they don't have to necessarily be the main character, just someone that's on the side of good, is some development, so we kind of like get to know them a little bit. Um, some attempt at, I'd say, having a memorable characteristic or set of characteristics. Uh, and then probably, hmm, I think those two at least, because just it's not because I know a lot of people say, oh, characters need to have flaws. Sometimes what we define as flaws, what somebody else defines as flaws, are not one and the same. Um, like sometimes a flaw can just be, oh, this person can't do this. That's why they need this other person because it makes them not a Mary Sue. They can actually they need this other person to do something. Like they can't just do everything by themselves. Um, but yeah, it's very. I'm trying to not be vague and just kind of go through it. But there are things where you kind of would need to just go story by story and say, okay, does this constitute as good to me or whatever. Oh man. So I have quite the day ahead of me. I have to go over here in about 4 hours. And I get off after 5 hours, so it's not as much of a hassle as it normally is, but that drive, man, that drive. Mm. Trying to think what else am I gonna say. But no, I like when you can just kind of see examples of how good something is or how bad it is, depending on the like fan reception is a good indicator of what people are receptive to and or not. Um, and it is oftentimes up to the writer or people involved to determine like, hey, is this a fair criticism? Is this something that we think we can actually address in a way that satisfies these people? Um, I know that when the first season of excuse me, of Justice League was being, developed, a lot of people didn't like that many of the episodes Superman would be taken out pretty easily, along with his design, because they gave him these, like, lines under his eyes to make him look older, and, in response, for season 2, they buffed him up, they gave him some more focus, they got rid of the lines. They really paid attention to what fans wanted, and I'm always appreciative of that because it's not these aren't like evil fans going, "This is, stupid." They are people who want to see the show succeed. They just have a very specific criticism that the creators were able to sit back, think about, and go, "Yeah, there is some logic to believing that this is not the way it should be." So, yeah, I'll probably, get off here and then come back, next Saturday, hopefully without any more ridiculous interruptions. Thanks for watching and have a good rest of your Monday. I know mine's is going to be a little crazy because it's just like every day is the same thing at this point. Drive over here, drive over there, drive over here. Mm.